Alright, you bastards, it's your boy Kana. I'm back like I never left, and I am here today to deliver y'all yet another amazing soapbox video for your airwaves. But instead of delving today into the wonderful world of video games, I thought I would take a crack at discussing, speculating, and theorizing about an upcoming film slated for March 4th of 2022. Of course, I'm talking about none other than Matt Reeves, the Batman. Now, the reason being as to why I decided to discuss yet another cinematic interpretation of The Dark Knight is simply because I am a fucking bat freak. I have such a deep love and respect for this character that I could have, and I saved y'all today, I could have made a multiple hour long video just discussing the themes, meanings, and nuances that Batman has explored in his 82-year-long history, but to save y'all some time and some brain cells, I'll briefly just discuss my own personal history with Gotham's Caped Crusader and why he's always meant so much to me, then leading into sort of what I think about Matt Reeves' new direction, what I think of Robert Pattinson, sort of my theories for the film, so on and so forth, okay? Firstly, let's get this out of the way. I have an absolutely insane, obnoxious amount of useless fucking Batman knowledge in my head. I've read and owned almost every major arc and standalone story in the comics. I've watched all the movies. I've played all the games. I mean, I literally own... hold on. I'll bring... You hear that? You hear that knocking? You hear that? This is a book. I know some of y'all don't read, but this is an encyclopedia. The essential Batman encyclopedia. The ultimate guide to the man behind the mask and mythology behind the man. Written by Robert Greenberg. I'm a Batman nerd. I mean, I literally won a GameStop Arkham Knight midnight launch event trivia quiz, answering every stupid fucking Batman question they threw at me because I live and breathe this shit, dog. Come at me. What does that really mean, sort of like in the grand context of things? Like, Connor, why are you making this video? Why the fuck do you care about this man, this psychopath, putting this bat costume on, running around at night? And the reason being is that he isn't just my favorite comic book character ever. Batman is my favorite fictional character ever. Point blank, period. The buck stops there with Batman. My entire life, Batman has been there. And a lot of that is due to my father's love for the character, along with him introducing me to Batman at such a young age. From there, my love for the character and DC Comics grew as a whole, but Batman was always different from the rest of the DC superheroes. For me, at least. And I fully started to realize that during high school, where I suffered from a lot of self-esteem issues, low ambition, but mainly a lot of anger. And as I got older and could now actually understand a lot of the themes within the comics, I found one thing remained true about a core pillar of Batman as a character. That being that no matter how much pain and suffering Batman endures, his sheer will to persevere through any obstacle, all while staying true to his vows and convictions, inspired me unlike anything else in this world, and there has yet to be anything else that has. I know that it sounds strange, I know that it sounds weird, I know that it's super fucking corny, but it's my truth, and I would even go as far to say that without Batman, I don't think this channel would have ever started. Okay, now I want to break this next section into two parts. The first section is going to go over what type of Batman story and world Matt Reeves is trying to set up, and then the second section will go over my current theories and speculation for the actual plot of this movie and the possibility of a trilogy. So, I bet you're saying to yourself, well, Connor, I've seen a Batman movie before, how's this any different? Which I do think is a fair and valid criticism, given that I know that some people do feel Batman out at this point. My rebuttal, however, would be that up until this point in Batman's cinematic history, you've never had a real accurate description of the Dark Knight. Now, what I just said might be a little controversial for some, given that a lot of people consider Nolan's trilogy to possibly be the best comic book movies of all time. I, however, do not think that, and before you jump down my throat, let me explain a little You see, Nolan's version of the character to me gets some things right, but also misses the mark on some very important things by a wide, long mile. Grounding Batman in quote-unquote the real world or reality is the first mistake a lot of directors make. Yes, Batman is just a human being with no powers. But with that said, the comic book version is essentially the perfect human being, or the peak that a human could ever reach, right? Meaning he is the closest a human could get to being just as good, if not better, than a lot of superpowered beings in the DC universe, all while having no actual meta-human abilities. So what exactly are Batman's abilities, given that I feel like a lot of people just think he's a guy that hides in the shadows and beats up on criminals? That is not the case, right? To start out with, he is considered an outright genius by almost everyone, including Darkseid, in the comics. He is a scientist, a chemist, an engineer crafting all of his own tools and gadgets, a master in almost all forms of martial arts, a master tactician and essentially war general when needed, and of course, I cannot forget the world's greatest detective. This is the reason why Batman is able to stand among the gods in the Justice League and not only have their respect, but also their fear. For years now, just like evil Superman has been played around with, evil Batman has been too, and essentially the sentiment a lot of authors basically give off is that if Batman ever actually went evil, he would essentially be the most dangerous man in the DC universe, given, like I said, all of the traits that make him him. Now, bringing it back to Nolan's version quickly before I move on to Matt Reeves' version, because I don't want to spend too much time on Nolan's, given that I do have a lot of nitpicks, and I feel like that would need another video for me to really flesh those out, so I'll just keep it brief. But like I said, Nolan plays around with some of these ideas, showing scenes of Batman being a martial artist, being a detective and a tactician. But to me, he never fully shows how intelligent and competent the character is supposed to be. And I get why he does that, because in Nolan's head, his version of Batman is much more real and human than the comic book version is actually supposed to be. But as a hardcore fan, it does bother me that Nolan essentially strips away a lot of core character traits in order to make a more grounded, realistic, real-world version of Batman, ultimately making his version feel more neutered than any of the past cinematic interpretations. But don't get me wrong, those are some really great films that I still enjoy rewatching to this day, but personally, I feel like Nolan misses the mark on what makes Batman, Batman. Now, we're going to move on to Matt Reeves' version and what he has for his vision of the film and the character. And I just have to say, if we're going off his words alone in some of the interviews that he's done, this might actually be the definitive sort of comic book accurate version of the character. From very early on, Reeves has not strayed away from talking about Batman with a certain level of passion that resembles how a lot of us hardcore fans feel, something that, in my opinion, was missing from a lot of the past directors' rhetoric before. The way he speaks about Batman lets me know at least his heart is in the right place, but also that he understands the character in a way that a lot of the past directors never did. But what exactly has he been saying to make me feel this way? Firstly, he has made it very clear from the start of him coming onto this project that he has wanted to make a detective film. And if we're to believe the recent rumors from the early screenings that also seem to double down on this sentiment, it's seeming like it's going to be very good. To me, Batman being a detective is extremely important because it is, once again, a side that has never been fully explored, but also integral to the DNA of the character's identity. Reeves has also stated multiple times that he is looking at Jeff Loeb's The Long Halloween as a reference point for the detective work in this movie. For those who aren't familiar with the comics, The Long Halloween is considered by many to be one of, if not the, best detective story in Batman's catalog. It's personally one of my favorite Batman stories that I still read yearly to this day. In the story, Batman is essentially trying to find out the Holiday Killer and why they are targeting certain members of Gotham society, which, I mean, if we're just looking at sort of the recent trailers, Riddler taking out current members of Gotham society, Batman has to figure it out. You know, the parallels are pretty much there. Reeves has also referenced 2 other Batman stories in particular that seemingly based off of the trailers have had a huge influence on the type of tone that he wants to set for his film. Those 2 stories are, of course, Frank Miller's Year One and the late, great Darwyn Cooke's Batman Ego. Now, most people who are casual Batman fans have probably heard Miller's Year One reference before, given that it was a huge inspiration for the Nolan trilogy in particular. The title pretty much describes exactly what it is, in that it's Batman's first year donning the cape and cowl. It serves as his definitive origin story, as well as a much more personal look into the psyche about why Bruce Wayne has made this vow to his parents and why he refers to it as his mission. Now, Darwyn Cooke's Batman Ego also takes a look into Batman's psyche, but in a much more extreme and personal way. The story goes like this. After a traumatic night of crime fighting, Batman returns back to the Batcave to make sense of the night's events. From there, Darwyn Cooke shows a side of Batman that has since become a staple in the mental health of Bruce Wayne. The story plays around with the idea that Bruce Wayne and Batman are 2 different personas entirely, and that on the night of Bruce Wayne's parents being murdered in Crime Alley, whoever Bruce Wayne was at that point, or whoever he might have been as he grew older, also died, giving birth to the Batman. The Batman persona in Cooke's story serves as a metaphor for Bruce's rage and fear that he never fully coped with since his parents' death. All throughout the 2 trailers, it seems like Reeves was able to integrate these elements perfectly. The film is set in year 2 of Bruce being Batman, meaning he is still very raw and unorthodox in all of his methods. From what both Matt Reeves and Robert Pattinson have said, their version of Bruce has a lot of anger and rage and is still struggling with what he wants Batman to represent. They've also stated that despite Bruce having to deal with his inner demons, and this being a much more personal and emotional Batman story, he is still very much going to be the comic book version of Batman, meaning that yes, he is a detective and for all intents and purposes the smartest jackass in the room. Yes, he will be inventing all of his gear and gadgets he uses, and yes, he will be the man who can go into a room of 20 thugs and still walk out standing. Reeves has also stated that Bruce putting on the cowl is his version of therapy, and that every fight in the film is going to feel very personal to Batman. Him saying these things honestly puts a huge smile on my face, given that this is exactly how Bruce acts in his early years. He hasn't figured out how exactly he wants to be yet, how he wants to operate, let alone how to actually put on a persona of Bruce Wayne. Gotham still views him as a myth or an urban legend meant to strike fear into the criminals of the city, something that Reeves has made reference to for his particular version of Bruce. It's not until he has a couple of years under his utility belt of being Batman that he realizes that his very presence in the city of Gotham is making it increasingly dangerous for the citizens that reside there, but also giving birth to a new type of strange and fantastic set of villains. To me, this is exactly what Reeves is setting up with his film. He wants to take Bruce on a personal journey from going from rage-fueled vigilante to Gotham's superhero. Now, in terms of the world Reeves is building for his film, he is definitely using elements from multiple different versions of Batman canon, at least in my opinion. Let's just start with Gotham, the city as a whole. From the different shots that you see in the trailer, Gotham has a much more distinct feel than in the past films. To me, it's a very modern, gothic, grimy feel, where you can tell that the city once was a financial mecca and is now a run-down, decrepit piece of shit. It's a place where you could easily see modern skyscrapers clash with the tall cathedrals and deteriorating brownstones in abandoned neighborhoods. If I was to make a comparison, I'd say he's definitely pulling from Frank Miller's Year One artwork, as well as the animated series' more distinct look and features of Gotham, mixing them both together to get this extremely graphic novel look and feel for the film. Another thing of note is that, yes, all while Matt Reeves is grounding Batman in Gotham like how Year One was, I do think you will see more fantastical and sci-fi elements in future movies. there are multiple shots in the film that lean into the more impossible superhero/comic book nature of Batman that a lot of the past films have kind of just blatantly ignored. I personally think this film will serve as the staging ground of Gotham, turning into a much stranger and fantastical place, like how it does in the comics. Reeves seems to understand that yes, Batman is a more grounded character when comparing to the likes of Superman, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, etc., but he seems to be embracing the actual comic book nature of the character and city and doesn't want his Batman to be one that could happen in the real world. He wants his version of Gotham and Batman to be a live-action version of the comics. Now, with that in mind, I could totally see Reeves' Gotham being a place that you could get a Mr. Freeze, a Poison Ivy, or a Clayface in. Now, in terms of how our Dark Knight looks for this film, the best way to describe his fucking appearance is terrifying, because he looks exactly like how he's supposed to look in the comics. He's horrifying, terrifying, scary. If I saw a man in the street dressed like Robert Pattinson's Batman, I would clearly move to the other side of the street because that is terrifying. As soon as you see him, and especially if you're a criminal, you should be shitting bricks, and I feel like for the most part that's what Matt Reeves has done. His armor in particular clearly has taken inspiration from Arkham Origins and Arkham Knight, with the more sort of ragtag, metally look that Origins suit was. You can see each individual piece of armor that Bruce has clearly put together himself, giving off very much like this is a prototype suit, meaning he has an idea of how he wants to look, but is still kind of working out the kinks. Now, the cowl, to me, is a legit thing of fucking beauty, despite how some people were wary on it at first. You can tell that Matt Reeves clearly read Gotham by Gaslight and fell in love with that cowl in particular. It's legit disturbing looking. It's legit scary looking, especially the way it's placed on Robert Pattinson's face, really like highlighting his eyes and the whites of his eyes, making him look nuts in certain fight scenes. I really dig it a lot, especially, kind of off, as sort of like an off balance of his entire suit and armor being Kevlar and metal, while the cowl seems to be made out of leather that assumingly Bruce has made himself. In terms of the Batcave, we really haven't seen much aside from the Lego set leaks, where once again, it seems like Bruce is just starting out and doesn't have a fully developed cave yet. He has a computer, he has a place to sort of tinker with his gear and make his own Batmobile. And speaking of the Batmobile, that thing has really grown on me since the first trailer. I think like a lot of people, you're a little wary of like, oh, it's going to be a muscle car, so are they kind of going to go for like a really like grounded in reality version? But it's really not that. It's a muscle car, sure, but there's a fucking jet engine on the back of that thing. You can tell that it's very much still a work in progress, but goddamn, that thing is sexy looking, and I really can't wait to see what the final version is going to look like. Overall, I feel that Matt Reeves' vibe for the movie is right up my alley. Now, all he really has to do is just to deliver on a great story. Speaking of story, here we are, boys and girls. We are finally here at the third and final act of this video, where I will give you my hot takes, theories, and speculation of what the possible plot of this film is, as where a possible trilogy might lead. All right, so I kind of want to jump straight into it. This has been a long, very, very long process with a lot of edits, a lot of transitions, a lot to say, but it's a character that means a lot to me. So let's just get started. Obviously, from what we know so far, this first film will really be a personal story about Bruce dealing with his rage and anger towards the criminal elements of Gotham City, along with him discovering what purpose Batman will serve in his life. Like I said earlier, Batman made a vow to his dead parents, promising to never let what happened to him happen to anyone else in the city ever again. I think it's safe to say that throughout the film, you'll see Bruce start out completely full of rage and anger, actually being resentful towards Gotham in general, since it hasn't changed since he was a boy. If this is truly using year one as a template, I can totally see Bruce going after what he considers corrupt in the city, which in his young, naive eyes at this point solely means taking down the petty criminals, mobsters, and cops that plague the streets each and every night. My thought process that leads me to believe this is true are the suspected roles of the Penguin and the Roman, aka Carmine Falcone, who will both appear in this film. I think in the beginning of the movie, Batman is taking down different Falcone illegal businesses, which the Penguin is in charge of. Yes, I do think that before the Penguin becomes the umbrella-twirling, monocle-wearing gangster that we all fucking either hate or love, he is in fact working for Carmine Falcone, either as his right-hand man or maybe a capo in the organized crime family that is the Falcones. Apparently the rumors are that the Penguin is not in the film very long, so I'd assume that Batman takes him out pretty early on before getting to the supposed big baddie of the film, the Riddler. In terms of what Carmine Falcone's role is going to be, my only guess is that at some point he will play a key role in providing possible evidence for whatever the Riddler has plotted. Now, for all you fucking noobs out there, the Falcones are essentially the last remnant of the old way of crime. The last memory of a Gotham that has moved on from them and have been replaced by what they consider freaks and psychos. Now, before we move on to the Riddler and what I think he's got up his sleeve and plan for big old bats, let's stick around with the Falcones for a second and also tie in Catwoman. First off, I don't think Catwoman is a villain in this movie. I think she will serve the purpose that she has always served in the comics, that of like an anti-hero love interest of Batman, obviously. Regardless, I think the personal beef that she has with the Falcones is going to be a couple of different things. There are some pretty decent parallels in the trailers with a few different scenes that specifically make reference to the Long Halloween, mainly the graveyard scene where the Falcones hold a funeral for the fallen gangster, and this scene right here, which I'm assuming is their first time meeting in the film. This is almost a one-to-one of the party scene in the Long Halloween where Batman stops her from robbing the Falcones. In terms of what Catwoman wants from the Falcones, that's a bit of a toss-up in my head. She could just want to steal from them because they've wronged her in the past, or she just doesn't like them, or maybe they'll go with the more recent addition to her mythos, seen in the actual animated version of the Long Halloween, where Catwoman, I keep saying fucking Catman! Catwoman suspects Carmine Falcone is, in fact, her father. Once again, she'll definitely play a role in the film, mainly a supporting role, helping Batman probably take down and solve whatever riddles the Riddler has left for him. But wait, don't forget, of course there's going to be other characters making appearance in the film, aside from probably some cameo ones that have been leaked like Tweedledee and Tweedledum. The only two that are really of note are, of course, Jim Gordon and Alfred Pennyworth. Jim's role will most likely be acting as the middleman for the GCPD's relationship with Batman. It's obviously from the opening of the first trailer, Batman is openly working with the GCPD at this point in time in the film, going into crime scenes, helping along with murder investigations, which most of the cops, clearly from the looks they give him, they do not like. Side note, just real quick side note, because I think this is funny, but it's also kind of important. Batman hated the GCPD and cops in general for such a long time. He considered much of the organization to be incompetent, dirty, and corrupt, aside from Jim and of course a few select others. So one can only assume with scenes like this, where it appears he is in custody at the GCPD, along with what looks like him escaping the GCPD, that his relationship with the police department in the city isn't entirely on best of terms right here and now, right? With Jim really being his only friend in the entire department. Personally, I don't think Jim is going to have much of a role in the movie aside from arresting the bad guys Batman obviously stops. I think you'll see much more of Jim Gordon in the HBO Max GCPD tie-in show that Reeves is actually working on, which sounds really cool. But the character I do think that will get a lot more screen time than the rest of the supporting cast is, of course, the good old butler boy himself, Alfred Pennyworth. Now, I'm of two minds when it comes to Mr. Pennyworth's role in this film. They could either go the more Jeff Johns Earth 1 route and actually make Alfred more of a badass ex-mercenary spy that teaches Bruce a thing or two during Bruce's training years, or they'll stick to the more comic-accurate version and essentially have him be Batman's eyes and ears back in the Batcave. Either way, Alfred's role will be entangled hand in hand with Bruce's personal journey throughout the film. In the second trailer, you can hear Alfred tell Bruce, clear as day, "If you do not stop, nothing will be left for you, Master Wayne." In which Bruce responds back to, "I don't care what happens to me," which sort of lends merit to what I believe is happening, where since it very much is early on in Bruce's career as Batman, he personally doesn't care if he dies at this point. In some poetic way, he believes that that's almost right? A good death, to make a Dark Knight reference. Obviously, this is Alfred trying to make Bruce stop being the Batman. It's clear from those lines that Alfred just isn't fully convinced in what Bruce is doing just yet, given that it is so early on in the life cycle of the Batman, right? Bruce, at this point, has given himself over to the cowl. He is obsessed personally with making sure that the mission is seen through. Alfred clearly sees that as a very big red flag. I also think that Alfred will probably be there in a lot more of the more emotional moments of the film, given that he is the only person left in Bruce's life serving as his surrogate father. Most likely, in Alfred's eyes, he has failed in raising the Wayne son like they would have wanted. But once again, these are all the side characters that have easier, predictable roles as opposed to the film's main antagonist, the Riddler. Jazz hands. Now, for the noobs, once again, for you fucking noobs, get your shit together. Riddler is an interesting character to pick, given that even in the comics, for most of the continuity, he has been considered a pushover villain, a joke if you will, which for the longest time most people were fine with. I never really cared about Riddler in the comics that much. I always thought he was a bit of a goof. I mean, nothing is really scary about a guy in a lime green suit covered in question marks saying, "Riddle me this, Batman." But however, there has kind of been a recent shift in the comics to make Riddler more cool or more formidable for the Caped Crusader. Both Jeff Johns and Tom King try to do this, but in my opinion fail in some regards, mainly because I didn't find a lot of the character traits that they tried to make their versions of Riddler have not very interesting. The only interesting Riddler arc, at least that I have read, has been Scott Snyder's Zero Year, where Riddler essentially takes over the city of Gotham, isolating it from the rest of the world, making it this weird Lord of the Flies situation, which is kind of like Dark Knight Rises, but we don't talk about that movie. But Reeves' version doesn't appear to be resembling much of the traditional version of the character at all. And what Reeves has said about his take on the Riddler is that he is essentially the Zodiac Killer, which is a interesting serial killer to pick, I guess. I mean, I guess it makes sense given that the Zodiac Killer left fucking puzzles and riddles. Maybe. Which makes sense once you kind of see him in the Gimp mask too, right? Like, it's a bit unnerving seeing him in the slight few shots that you do. They're also seemingly hiding his face. Maybe there's going to be a giant scar or a big reveal that maybe will play into one of my theories. In both trailers, you can hear the Riddler ask different riddles, assumingly towards Batman, in this unnerving, deep Paul Dano creep voice. For those who don't know, for some reason, Paul Dano almost exclusively plays a creep in a lot of his more popular roles, so this serial killer version of Riddler seems right up this guy's wheelhouse. But now it's time, boys and girls, okay? Now it's time, folks, for my hot takes. Now it's time for Conspiracy Theory Connor, all right? All right, folks, let's get this. I have two specific theories as to what Riddler is actually doing in this film. Theory A, all right, is that Riddler is killing the upper echelon, the elite of Gotham, if you will, because they are the class of people who have never been punished in the city. Maybe we'll get some backstory in both of the theories that I'm going to present, where Riddler has been wronged, or maybe his family was killed, or maybe he was scarred on his face or something by corrupt wealthy businessmen or politicians for the city. From there, he decided that it's time to purge the actual scum and corruptness in the city, which in his mind is the 1% of Gotham. In theory A, I also believe that Riddler does know who Batman is and wants to shine a light on Bruce's family lineage, either painting Thomas and Martha, which are both Bruce's parents, in a questionable light, or just the Wayne family tree in general in a questionable light, right? In his mind, Riddler thinks Bruce is the enemy because he is the 1%. He is the wealthy elite with so much power, not leaving much for anyone else, which would make sense since I said earlier that Bruce isn't thinking about white-collar criminals at this point. He's not thinking about the people that he grew up with, right? He's only thinking about the street-level ones, which in Riddler's mind is very wrong. There's a scene in the trailer where the Riddler asks, "If you are justice, do not lie. What is the price for your blind eye?" That's my best Paul Dano. To me, this is a question clearly aimed at Bruce, since he considers himself not only to be vengeance, but also the only real force of justice in the city, which I interpreted as Riddler pointing out to Batman that he has been ignoring the actual corruption going on in the city for a very long time. Okay, now it's time for Theory B, which is essentially extremely similar to Theory A in that Riddler knows who Batman is and is leaving a trail of dead upper echelon Gotham Knights. Riddler, like in Theory A, is trying to point out Batman's blind eyes, that Batman's eyes have been blind to these types of criminals and that they are the real black heart of the city. However, all right, stick with me here. I know this is kind of a leap, and some people are going to be like, shut the fuck up, Connor. However, the biggest difference with Theory B is that Riddler is not only just killing the wealthy, powerful citizens of Gotham, Riddler is actually killing members of the Court of Owls. Now, once again, for you fucking noobs who don't know shit about comics, go pick up a comic book, bitch. The Court of Owls are essentially what I just described. They are the wealthy elite, whether it be billionaires or politicians within the city of Gotham, shaping it to their own liking. They are the Illuminati specifically just for Gotham City. I don't know why it doesn't extend to the rest of the world, but just for some reason, Gotham has its own Illuminati. The story arc, which was done by Scott Snyder, I found extremely well done. It is a good story that sort of checks Batman's ever-growing ego and also makes it known to Batman that there are bigger myths and possible unknown legends that he doesn't even know about the city yet. And if they actually do this, if they actually go this fucking route, or even if they just set it up, like let's say like the last scene of the movie is Riddler being like, I didn't fucking kill any of those people, right? And it turns out that it was Talons, right? There's like video footage of like a Talon killing these people. He's like, I just went there and I was just pointing you in the right direction. Like, that would be fucking insane because, yes, the Court of Owls are a much newer addition to the Rogues Gallery, but they are fairly formidable, or at least the Court of Owls storyline made them that way. And I think for sort of the version of Gotham and Batman that Matt Reeves is going for, these are characters and these are villains that fit sort of perfectly in what he has envisioned, right? Now, I don't know if it's going to be that, hey, by the end of the movie, Batman takes down the Court of Owls, right? I don't know if it's going to be like a bait and switch where it's like Riddler gets taken to jail and then he explains to him. I don't know. I don't know if it's going to set up for the second movie. I don't know if it's going to be like a third movie payoff. All I know is that I think there are some pretty big hints that sort of kind of lead you in that direction. Nothing overt. There's not like a fucking owl really like point out. There's not like a shot of Matt Reeves like watching an owl, hoo, right? None of that shit. But I think there's sort of enough within the trailers and sort of the motives that we're assuming about Riddler that are there to assume that. So that's it, boys. We're at the end. Court of Owls. I'm a fucking bet all the money in the world that it might be that. We're finally at the end of the video. Thank you for sticking around. Like I said, I know this is probably a lot longer than I intended it to be, but I'm very happy that I was able to put this out, given, like I said at the beginning of this video, Batman is a character that means the world to me. So finally seeing something that resembles what I've always read in the comics is something that brings me a great amount of joy that I really can't describe to a lot of people. With that said, we're gonna cut this video. We're done. We're out. I'm tired. There's a lot of editing, a lot of shit that I've done for this video, and I don't know what next week's video is gonna be. I don't even know if I'm gonna do one next week. I probably will, but you know, like, subscribe if you would. I'd also appreciate comments down below to see what I can do better with next time. I always appreciate that. And until then, stay groovy, you bitch motherfuckers.